Pay close attention. This is not simply another message. And it's no coincidence that you're here right now. This is a confirmation. For years, maybe even before you were born, there were individuals who toiled behind the scenes, pulling strings and talking in secret chambers, creating a reality meant to keep you locked in illusions. They planned events, manipulated situations, and made certain that everything in your life was tightly managed. They took everything, the life you were destined to have, the possibilities that should have been yours, and even the truth about yourself. But despite their best efforts, you were never meant to slumber indefinitely. And suddenly something is shifting. The fissures are developing. The carefully constructed walls of deceit are starting to shake. Those who formerly pledged devotion to these falsehoods are beginning to doubt. Their voices falter as admissions fall through the cracks. What they have buried, what was deleted, and they promised it would never be mentioned again. Everything is coming to light, even the most important fact. It was always you. They dreaded the most. They wanted you to assume that your suspicions were not shared by others. You were imagining things, that your difficulties were random, that the opposition you encountered was simply poor luck. But deep down, you knew something about your life. Never added up. The struggles, the betrayals, the way doors slammed shut before you could pass through. It was not an accident. It was by design. Throughout it all, you stood firm and refused to break. You only refined yourself. Every minute of darkness just fueled your brightness. They expected you to tumble, but you became the storm they never saw coming. If you can feel the weight of this truth crushing against your spirit, drop 777 currently in the comments section. Let the world know that you can see through falsehoods. Also, many thanks to everyone who has helped spread this word. Your gift drives this purpose, ensuring that the truth gets to those who need it the most. Thank you for standing in the light. This is the tipping point. The world they created via lies is crumbling, and you are still here, unstoppable, unshaken, unbreakable. The issue now is, are you prepared to regain what they took from you? What you're going to hear will alter the way you perceive things. Continue to watch, because once you know the truth, there's no turning back. God's chosen one. You've lost your entire life. You passed the dimly lighted room. The weight of revelation bears down on the informant. His hands quiver. His breath is irregular. Not out of fear, but because of the enormity of the information he is about to reveal. These aren't just words coming from his lips. They are admissions that have been concealed. Secrets were never meant to be revealed. Every identity, every dark transaction, and every act of treachery spills forth like a dam that has finally given way beneath the weight of years. They believed they had locked the past away, and that their empire, founded on secret, deception, and quiet threats, would last forever. But what happens when the truth refuses to remain hidden, like a fracture in an impregnable fortress? What started as a minor leak has turned into an overwhelming flood. They carefully devised falsehoods and covered misdeeds, and the whispered discussions that they thought were gone to the wind have returned, etched into recordings they can't erase. The past has a way of speaking through the passages of time, refusing to stay quiet. No amount of money, fake documents, or frantic cover-ups could fully undo what had been done. The book of Ecclesiastes cautions that God will judge every deed, even every concealed item, whether good or wicked. Ecclesiastes 12:14, they believed they had evaded accountability, but the hidden hand of justice was constantly active. Have you ever pondered why God permits hidden facts to remain dormant until they are revealed at the appropriate time? Perhaps because no deceit can withstand the light indefinitely. This trend has already been seen throughout history. Think of King David, who planned Uriah's death to conceal his adultery with Bathsheba. For a time, it appeared that his secret had been buried. But God sent the prophet Nathan to face him and declare, "You are the man." 2 Samuel 12:7. What David assumed to be hidden was instead an open book before the Lord. Similarly, Those who established their thrones via deception now face a mirror. They can't break their well-crafted web until an unbreakable wall is unraveled. Thread by thread, the admissions join like links in a chain, creating a comprehensive image that cannot be refuted. One name leads to another, and each discovery ignites the next, just as Joseph's brothers believed they had gotten rid of him by selling him into slavery and persuading their father he was dead. The past did not remain buried. Years later, when famine hit, they unintentionally confronted Joseph. Their misdeeds surfaced at a time of reckoning. Genesis 4,221. Could it be that what we are witnessing now is a heavenly cycle in which every secret crime, whispered falsehood, and false testimony is ultimately being tracked? Even in modern times, we've seen mighty figures fall from grace when the weight of their secrets became too much to bear. Think of Richard Nixon, formerly one of the world's most powerful men. The Watergate incident, which was first disregarded as a small violation, grew into an indisputable revelation of corruption. What he assumed would never come to light proved to be his undoing, demonstrating that even the most solid castles of secrecy may shatter in an instant. So now, when the walls of falsehood crumble, the question remains, what will happen next? The past always left footsteps, and each one is being retraced. The moment of reckoning has here. And for those who believe they could flee the repercussions of their deeds, the truth has finally caught up. But here's something to consider. When the tide of exposure arrives, will you be discovered standing in the truth or scurrying to conceal what can no longer be hidden? They felt that quiet could be purchased, that fear and riches may keep the truth hidden indefinitely. However, some burdens are too enormous to carry alone. Some men falter beneath the weight of secrets. Others break in pursuit of redemption. And some, motivated by revenge, become the very force that sends the house of falsehood crashing down. The motivations behind the unraveling may vary, but the truth does not require a reason to rise. Once started in motion, it is unstoppable. For far too long, they acted as if they were untouchable, that no earthly or divine rule could hold them accountable. They formed policies behind closed doors, controlled economies, and grew their power in the shadows, where no one dared dispute their authority. However, hubris leads to error. Do they honestly believe that power could continue forever? The book of Proverbs says, "Pride precedes destruction, and a haughty spirit precedes fall." Proverbs 16:18. Throughout history, tyrants and empires have defied reality, believing themselves immune to the repercussions of their deeds, until the moment everything crashed. Think about King Nebuchadnezzar, who exalted himself over God. He transformed Babylon into a stronghold of domination. Not boasting is this huge Babylon, which I established with my tremendous force. Daniel 4:30. But his hubris led to his demise, and in a second, his dominion was taken from him. Could it be that those who felt they were above the law are suddenly suffering the same fate behind closed doors? Desperation festers. The same comrades who previously sworn devotion were now whispering bargains in dark corners, prepared to exchange identities for their own safety. What was once an impenetrable fraternity held together by power and greed is dissolving strand by strand. Each whispered exchange becomes proof. Every trustworthy confidant is a potential betrayer. The barriers they created to keep their secrets safe no longer protect them, but rather mirror their demise. Mirrors expose the flaws in that well-built kingdom. We have seen this cycle before. Consider the downfall of the iconic financial magnate Bernie Madoff. For years, his Ponzi scheme was hidden behind a facade of luxury and exclusivity. He twisted trust by convincing investors that he was untouchable. However, once a single thread was removed, the entire system crumbled. The machine he had created to dominate and profit from others became the force that destroyed him. What happens when the fortress of deception becomes a jail rather than a stronghold? Those who previously commanded fear now sit atop their disintegrating hierarchy. Their calls are disregarded. Their impact dwindles, and the empire they created is rotting from inside. The individuals being mentioned are not pawns. They are the architects. These are the hidden hands that have molded entire sectors, influenced economies, and changed governments to further their own interests. Their reach spread to regions where no one dared to challenge their unseen threads, influencing millions' fates. Yet their own arrogance proved to be their undoing. They assumed immunity, believing that the passage of time would erase their transgressions from memory. However, no falsehood lasts forever. Every kingdom established on deception leaves its mark, subtle at first, but obvious. As the layers are peeled away, fissures appear, and names are brought to light. Executives who stole riches in plain sight, assuming no one would notice. Lawmakers who traded ethics for power were certain that their betrayals would never be discovered. Enforcers who buried evidence were assured that their secrets would remain hidden. Public speakers that formed narratives are now caught up in their own deceit. They spent their lives building a mechanism to control, manipulate, and repress. But now the system is turning against them. The gears they relied on to keep them going are grinding to a standstill, and this time they're being disassembled. Jesus himself said that nothing is hidden that will not be revealed. There is no secret that will remain hidden. Luke 8:17. They created their universe via deceit, constructing lie after falsehood like a house of cards in the wind. But the truth always comes knocking. It makes no difference how many walls they built, how many vaults they secured, or how many voices they suppressed. What is done in darkness will always be brought into the light. It's more than just a moral law. It is not just a universal law. This is God's holy rule, a law that no man, empire, or power in the world can outrun. And now the reckoning has started. Initially, they went about their empires with complete confidence, their heads held high, their steps unwavering. They considered themselves untouchable, certain that riches was their impenetrable armor and influence, their unbreakable sword, with pockets loaded with gold and power lying firmly in their grip. They dismissed justice as a fairy tale, an annoyance intended for people below them. They scoffed at the mere idea of penalties, sneered at the notion that they might ever be taken down. They had risen so far in their ivory towers that they truly felt they had changed the rules of fate itself. However, hubris has always been the cause of downfall. The one thing that convinces a man of his invincibility is frequently the very thing that guarantees his downfall. The initial fracture was minor and unimportant, so they disregarded it. It was little more than a whisper in the wind, a glimmer in the darkness, another voice that they were confident could be suppressed. A desperate soul seeking atonement. A solitary individual with a single narrative that appeared simple to forget. However, the truth cannot be obliterated. The initial whisper was quickly followed by a second and finally a third. Then, like floodgates, the voices multiplied. Different people from various parts of the world, each with their unique testimony. Yet they all sing the same obvious truth. The foundation they had spent years reinforcing, built on manipulation, avarice, and well-planned lies, began to wobble. The once solid earth beneath them now seemed like shifting sand. Fear did not appear all at once. It seemed like a frigid raft, slipping between the crevices of a shut door. At first, it was subtle and went unnoticed. But before long, it was crowding in from all sides, stifling them in ways they'd never experienced. Their once glorious gatherings in soaring glass offices were now whispered. Gatherings in poorly lit spaces. They had previously executed their plans with perfection, but now they were hurried and cobbled together in the middle of night. Their phones, which were formerly meant to demand obedience, are now lighted up with desperate calls. Their voices, once so confident, now trembled with intensity. Their remarks were carefully coded in an unsuccessful attempt to save what had already been gone. Did they forget the tragedy of King Belshazzar, who feasted in his castle, drank from stolen sacred vessels, and considered himself untouchable? He, too, believed his dominion would never collapse. But as he raised his cup in arrogance, the hand of God etched his fate on the wall, with numerous tekel passing Daniel. 525, the proclamation that his days were numbered, his reign had been waged and failed, and his kingdom would be taken away from him. That very night, his authority was taken away. Didn't these modern rulers believe the same heavenly law would apply to them, even in the world outside of Scripture? History confirms this reality. Consider Enron, the corporate behemoth that formerly dominated the energy markets with unwavering conviction. Its leaders believed they were financially immortal, crafting falsehoods so complicated that regulators feared they could never be untangled. But it just took one leak, one little break, and the entire facade collapsed. The empire, once invincible, crumbled in shame. The same guys who had controlled billions now sat in courtrooms. Their power was restricted to just guilty judgments and jail terms. They'd spent their lives controlling the world around them, twisting systems, bending laws, and silencing anyone who disagreed. They believed they had control, yet it slid straight through their fingers. It wasn't intended to happen this way, but it did because no empire founded on falsehoods can last forever. No amount of power, riches, or influence can prevent the final reckoning. And now the reckoning has arrived. For years, no. For decades, they methodically sculpted the universe to match their goals, bending the fabric of reality to suit their plans. They hushed those who witnessed too much, eliminating everyone who tried to question their carefully manufactured illusion with absolute certainty. They crafted the screenplay for history, directing how the tale would develop, believing that every chapter, every page, and every last word will end in victory. But what they never anticipated, what they could never plan for, was you. This tale was never entirely theirs to write. Long before their power grew, before they erected their fortresses in hidden rooms and made their agreements behind closed doors, the conclusion was already predetermined. This conflict was not chosen in their boardrooms, nor was it won in backroom negotiations. It was decided in the sky by the one who controls eternity in his hands. They believed they had the power to change fate. However, they ignored one irrefutable reality. God's will cannot be undone. They assumed they could hide the truth behind layers of lies. They convinced themselves that if falsehoods were repeated enough times, they would become true. But what they didn't realize is the reality. Divine truth cannot be suppressed. It is alive, breathing, and unrelenting. As Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:32. Truth does not submit. When driven into the shadows, it does not withdraw. Rather, it accumulates power and waits for the right opportunity to emerge. That moment has finally arrived. The weight of the inevitable bears on them, and they can feel it in their bones. Their fortifications are eroding. Their once perfect facade are crumbling, revealing the rot beneath what was once a kingdom founded on deception and control, but is now consumed in flames. The voices they hushed, the individuals they treated as disposable puppets, are no longer whispering. They are yelling, naming names, and demanding justice. Does this remind you of the story of Pharaoh? He, too, felt he could reject the divine will. He held Israel prisoner, built his empire on their pain, and ignored God's warning. However, when the promised moment arrived, his empire was not just disturbed. It was dismantled. His vanity drove him to follow God's chosen people into the sea. And in his hubris, he never imagined that the seas that had parted for them would close around him. Exodus 1426-28. History repeats itself, even in the current era. How many times have we witnessed folks in authority collapse when they least expected it? Think about Bernie Madoff, the former maestro of financial fraud. Building an empire on lies, he convinced the world that he was untouchable until he wasn't. When the truth emerged, everything disintegrated overnight. The folks who formerly lauded him are now the ones exposing him. His stronghold wasn't as strong as he expected. So it is now. They never planned for this. They never imagined the day of reckoning would arrive. They disregarded prophecy as nonsense, ignoring indications written long before their empires took shape. However, the truth cannot be delayed indefinitely. God's chosen ones were never intended to dwell in the shadows. And now you're walking into the light. The conflict is not approaching. It's here. The transition has started. Are you ready? Those who had previously hidden in the shadows, cleaning up evidence, silencing witnesses, and removing every sign of their misdeeds, suddenly found themselves fighting for survival. Those who had previously guaranteed that no loose ends remained were now feverishly wrapping up their own files, which vanished overnight. Servers were wiped clean, and bank accounts were drained in a desperate bid to forget the past. However, no matter how deeply they buried the evidence, the past always finds a way to rise. They believed they had perfected deceit, yet each erased record cast a shadow. Every delete transaction left a persistent trail. Every whisper transaction left breadcrumbs that only the appropriate eyes could follow. Then it occurred. The first domino fell. The shock spread across their ranks. A flaw in that neatly constructed armor. Someone high above. Someone they promised would never shatter. Finally broke under the crushing weight of solid evidence. And with that solitary fall, the rest came crashing down. Panic spreads like wildfire. Our legal team tried to turn the reality into something recoverable, trying to change the narrative before it destroyed them. Their spin doctors swamped the airwaves, aiming to alter reality itself. However, this time, the falsehood was too huge. The devastation was beyond repair. One voice became two became 10, and before they could even try to restrict it, the floodgates had already opened. The voices now speaking were not just foot troops. They were the architects of the empire they had created, the ones who had kept the most profound secrets. The ones who had laid the groundwork for their lie were now revealing everything. What happens when the empire's creators begin taking it down with their own hands? Nothing can prevent the collapse. This was no longer a gradual degradation. It was a free fall. Confessions piled atop confessions. Patterns developed. Connections become evident. The elaborate walls of deceit created over years of manipulation and control collapsed under the weight of their own corruption. They tried to slow their descent. They moved assets, severed ties. Contingency preparations have been activated. Some disappeared into the night. They're concealing their money. They were desperate to find safe passage before the tsunami devoured them. Others went out to former pals, requesting favors and hoping for safety. However, no one wanted to go down with them. The powerful, who had hitherto dominated via intimidation, terror, and the weight of their influence, suddenly discovered that their weapons had been made ineffective. They were no longer wanted by the people they had ruled over. And in that instant, a realization hung over them like a thick veil. The future they had previously taken for granted had vanished. Isn't this similar to the fate of Judas Iscariot, a man with power in his hands, trusted and protected, moving inside the inner circle of Christ himself? However, when the weight of his treachery grew too great, he attempted to undo what could not be undone. He returned the 30 pieces of silver, seeking to absolve his guilt. But the priests who once embraced him have suddenly discarded him with chilly contempt. Matthew 20:73-25. He had accomplished his goal, and now he was nothing. This phenomenon has occurred often throughout history. Look at Jeffrey Epstein. Previously, the most powerful people shielded you. His secret kingdom prospered in the shadows. But when the truth came out, when the murmurs turned into shouts, those who had once stood by him vanished, as if they had never known him. Nobody wanted to be taken down alongside him. So it is now. The earth underneath them isn't just trembling, it is breaking apart. A guy who had spent his whole existence untouchable, going through the world as if he were beyond consequence, now finds himself out of time, out of moves, and without allies. The walls of his citadel fall to rubble, and an empire founded on falsehood. It cannot be reconstructed if the foundation is destroyed. The thief comes just to steal, murder, and destroy. I came so that people might live their lives to the fullest. John 10:10. They never just wanted to stop you. No, stopping was not enough. They intended to obliterate you. They sought to erase all traces of your existence from history. Every impression you made was erased, and every truth you expressed was drowned out by the wind. Not just broken, forgotten. Because disclosure is not the biggest threat to people who gain power by deception. It is resistance. They're terrified by the rise of people they tried to oppress, rather than the fall of a single man. It is the one voice that refuses to be hushed, the one light that refuses to go out. But one flame refuses to be extinguished. The flame is you, and they never anticipated what occurs when you refuse to be erased. Initially, it was a modest door that remained closed no matter how many times you knocked. A talk that ended before it really started. An opportunity that vanished before you even knew it existed. You had a sensation that something was wrong, but you couldn't pinpoint what it was. They examined your every step, testing the depth of your faith and perseverance. Were you as robust as you appeared? Could you be broken? They did not require an open confrontation. They merely had to chip away at your spirit, one disappointment at a time. When quiet protest wasn't enough, they upped their tactics. They didn't merely close the doors. They made sure that every road you took was full with diversions, delays, and dead ends. Victories you believed were yours proved to be mirages. Carefully planned setups are intended to make your fall even more deadly. Each stride forward seemed like 2 steps backward. They twisted the circumstances to make you question your mission, purpose, and faith. Could you trust those around you? Were you imagining all of this? Were you supposed to keep fighting it all? Because the true conflict never occurred in the physical world. It was always on your mind. Satan did not need to touch Eve in the garden. He only had to make her doubt what God had previously said. Genesis 3 verses 1-5. The same method has been applied in your life. They did not need to physically take anything from you. If they could get you to undermine your own success, all they had to do was plant seeds of dread, weariness, and hopelessness and watch them bloom. They changed history, distorted reality, and altered perception until the truth itself seemed like a lie. They whispered into your ear, "You are the problem. You're reaching too high, fighting too hard. You do not belong here. You're imagining everything." When it wasn't enough to convince you to give up, they went for the source of your resistance. Your stability, your riches, the very base. Money ran out, chances vanished, businesses failed, and promises crumbled before they could be realized. People that previously stood by you vanished without a trace. It was not poor luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was strategic warfare. But here's the reality about warfare. It will not end until one side surrenders. But you didn't, because you were never supposed to take the easy way. You were never promised a life free of adversity, only if the flames did not devour you. Isaiah 43 verse 2. God never promised that the waters would not rise. He claimed they would not sweep you away. He never stated the war wouldn't happen. He stated that the win was already yours. Look at Job's narrative. Everything had been taken from him: his money, family, and health. Satan said Job would blaspheme God and lose his faith. But Job persevered, and in the end, he was restored beyond anything he had previously experienced. Job 42:10. Now ask yourself why you believe they tried so hard to shatter you. Because they knew your identity before you did. They saw something you couldn't see. The power within you, the anointing, the predetermined destiny. They attempted to change your tale, forgetting that only one author has the pen. And this chapter is far from ended. They believed that control was their inheritance, that every action was predictable, and that they could decide the outcome. They believed them. Manipulation was advantageous. They had no idea they were going into a storm they couldn't see. They moved forcefully. The counter represented patience. They acted arrogantly. The counter was silent. Every setback, delay, and treachery served to refine you rather than kill you. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, then sold into slavery, unjustly charged and imprisoned. But in the end, the very individuals who had betrayed him had to approach him for assistance. What they intended for evil, God turned for the better. Genesis 5020. So it is with you. They believed their hold on power was unshakable. However, the same structures on which they depended are collapsing beneath them. The people they trusted the most are abandoning ship. The faithful are forming secret agreements and constructing procedures to keep outsiders out. They have now trapped them inside. Every illusion they created is now crumbling. The weight of their own acts will draw them down, since it was never about who had power. Just a second. It was all about endurance. It was about who could go through the flames and escape unscathed. And when the dust settles, when everything is stripped away, those who used power manipulation or deception will not be the ones who remain. It will be those who refuse to collapse. It was never about physical strength, just as it was with David and Goliath. It was about unshakable faith. Samuel, who lived from 1745 to 1747, believed that individuals who looked to have an advantage were doomed to fail. However, if you do not do the correct thing, sin is waiting for you. It wishes to have you, but you must govern over it. Genesis 4.7. They constructed barriers to keep the truth out. They were certain they could bury it. Erase it. It will be silenced forever. But the truth is like a seed. It doesn't perish in the dark. It takes root. It increases. And when the time is right, it blossoms. Undeniable. Unstoppable. There is no amount of power or trickery. No amount of opposition can prevent what was always destined to be revealed. And the question no longer concerns them. It is about you. Will you face the truth? It was always yours. Will you walk in the authority that they worked so hard to take from you? Will you finally accept what you've been yearning for all along? Because this is more than simply survival. This is awakening. This marks the rising of God's chosen. At first, it was hardly audible in the breeze. A transient whisper, too faint to be detected. A modest movement to inconsequential might cause anxiety. They rejected it, confident that their castle was impenetrable and that their carefully built web of deception would survive the test of time. But they didn't realize that a single fracture is all it takes for a flood to start. A single drip develops into a stream. A brook becomes a river. And now the dam has cracked. The barriers they created to protect themselves have turned into a prison. The quiet they placed on others is irreparably shattered. The carefully kept secrets, formerly whispered in backrooms and hidden in coded transactions, are now shouted openly in shaky voices, not as rumors, but as confessions under the harsh light of truth. There is no place to conceal the voices they want silenced. They are now the narrators of the narrative they attempted to conceal. And this time, the image they're drawing is plain, unmistakable, and damning. They believe they had removed all traces. They were confident that the past had been changed. The evidence is destroyed. The footprints are covered. However, the past is difficult to erase since truth leaves footprints. The paper traces they were expecting had disappeared. They are resurrecting phone records that they said had been destroyed. They're being recovered. The concealed transactions are buried under layers of deceit. They're coming to light. It only takes one misplaced paper to reveal all. One neglected detail and one anonymous voice. Courageous enough to shatter the hush. One thread, and the entire tapestry begins to unravel. Doesn't this remind you of Haman's collapse in Esther, a man who believed he had total power, who created gallows for the innocent while considering himself untouchable? However, the trap he constructed proved his own undoing. Esther 720. His hubris blinded him to the cracks appearing beneath his feet. There was no way out once the truth was revealed. This is the pattern of history. Pride, blindness, and falsehood always crumble under their own weight. Consider Richard Nixon, formerly the world's most powerful man. He assumed his secrets have been buried. His effect is undeniable. But it just took a single recording, one he felt was inconsequential, to bring down the president. The lying castle he created failed to protect him. It entrapped him. So it is now. Fear was always their strongest weapon. They dominated via intimidation, crushing dissent before it could arise. But fear is fickle. It bends and moves, and now it's turned against them. The voices in the darkness now speak of escape rather than allegiance. The same hands who constructed their empire are now demolishing it, brick by brick. Those who previously carried out their commands in secrecy are now identifying names and revealing truths, tearing down the illusion. The tide has shifted because truth cannot be suppressed indefinitely. They believed they were in charge, but they failed to account for the God who sees everything. For nothing is hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing disguised that will not be recognized and brought out. Luke 817. This is no longer a gradual degradation. They never saw this deluge coming. Those who formerly sworn unshakable fealty are now speaking. Those who kept their secrets with unwavering silence, making bargains out of desperation or revenge. But this is the reality. It does not care about motivations. It simply cares that it is now free. For so long, they felt they had complete control over the tale. They dictated what was said, what was hushed, what was redone. They molded reality to their will. They were convinced that if they used enough influence, intimidation, and strategically placed distractions, they could shape the truth into anything they desired. But they neglected one thing. The creator of truth does not need their consent to disclose what was always there. And they no longer gripped the pen. This is more than simply an inconvenient day. This is not just a regrettable sequence of circumstances. This is a judgment. The walls they trusted had turned against them. The locking doors have been pushed wide open. The castle they constructed is disintegrating from the inside out. And the worst part? They understand there is no escape, no rewriting, no hiding, no way out. They believed they could conceal the truth. However, the hole was never deep enough since the dissidents were never abrupt. It does not start with a thunderous explosion. It begins in the background, in subtle changes, in murmurs, with barely audible names rising. As in a report, a meeting concludes with an unsettling quiet. A close ally abruptly drops their calls. And suddenly, like dominoes, everything crumbles. The foundation has fissures. Those who formerly marched in perfect synchrony start to diverge. Some flee before the tide swallows them. Some people violate their devotion in order to survive. Some just vanish, knowing there is no way to escape what is coming. Those who previously instilled dread now wait for calls that never arrive. The powerful players who formerly dominated the game have witnessed the board turn before their eyes. The troops they deployed as shields now refuse to respond. The strong allies who had formerly protected them have cut links, refusing to be pulled down with them since loyalty is the first thing to burn when a fire spreads. Doesn't this remind you of King Saul's downfall? A man anointed by God, surrounded by the greatest authority in the nation, yet brought down by his own actions. The ones who had praised him sent away his most faithful warrior. David became his biggest danger. In the end, Saul stood alone. His power is gone. His dominion was lost. His allies scattered. Samuel 31, 1-6 history repeats itself. Those who create their empires via deceit always fail. Consider that Enron was previously one of the world's most powerful businesses. They manipulated statistics, controlled narratives, and suppressed critics until one whistleblower revealed the truth. Then, like dominoes, everything fell apart. The individuals who once stood together have gone in separate ways, each attempting to rescue themselves. Unfortunately, it was too late. The illusion was broken. So it is now. They based their empire on the delusion of invincibility, believing that the appropriate connections, money, and levers of power would keep them invincible. However, illusions can only last so long before they shatter, and there is no way to repair them. There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing disguised that will not be discovered and brought to light. Luke 8:17, this is not the conclusion of the tale, but it does signal the end of the delusion. The reckoning is no longer a far-off storm on the horizon. It's here. It's banging at the door. The identities they said would never be uttered are suddenly news all around the world. The transactions that were hidden are again open. Ledgers are inspected by eyes. They can no longer hide the fact that the meticulously designed lies on which they built their empire have crumbled beneath the crushing weight of unwavering truth. They're not just losing influence. They're losing everything. There are no more exits, safety nets, or controls. For years, they changed the laws, molded reality, and twisted the world to their will. They convinced themselves that only those who were brave enough to gain power had the ability to shape history and dictate the future with enough riches, leverage, and strategically positioned hands in high positions. However, reality has no master. It doesn't forget. It is not a race, and it never lets them get away unharmed. The wicked fled when no one follows them, but the virtuous are courageous. As a lion, Proverbs 28 verse 1, they moved like ghosts, controlling from the shadows with unseen hands, tugging every thread and orchestrating every movement. They played the game from behind the curtain, impenetrable and invisible. They were certain that their dominance would remain forever. They strode like rulers controlled destiny, smashing resistance before it could ever form. But vanity usually precedes the collapse. Did Nebuchadnezzar not consider himself invincible? Did he not look over his wide realm and exclaim, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built as my royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Daniel 4:30, however, his hubris led to his humiliation as he was thrown from his throne, deprived of his sanity, and reduced to a man roaming like a beast, until he finally saw that all authority belongs to God alone. So it is now. History does not favor people who assume they are above criticism. Think of Harvey Weinstein, who was once an unstoppable power in Hollywood. For decades, he operated in the shadows, shielded by riches, influence, and terror. But as the first speaker spoke, the dam broke. The murmurs escalated into yells. The concealed was exposed. And eventually, he lost everything. They thought they were above consequences. However, the shadows from which they reigned have now turned against them. And when the last chapter of this drama is completed, it will not be one of power and supremacy. It will be a warning, a reminder that no castle constructed on falsehoods can last long. For years, they altered reality to suit their purposes, altering history. Those who dared to protest were silenced, and every step was manipulated to guarantee they always had the advantage. They were masters of deceit, creating illusions so convincingly that the world accepted their lies as truth in their minds. Control was not a luxury, but an inalienable right. They held the view that regulations were designed for others, not for themselves. That regardless of the opposition, they would always control the end conclusion. However, control is only effective when the world buys into the illusion. And now nobody believes anymore. The unraveling started gradually, almost invisibly. A soft murmur in the distance. A single figure breaks ranks. A bit of information slips between the gaps. A document that could not be deleted. a financial imbalance that could not be overlooked. At first, they ignored them as mere inconveniences. They were brushed away with laughter and arrogance. However, even a little fissure in the foundation might lead to collapse. They had spent their entire lives constructing what they thought was an impenetrable fortress. But now the barriers are collapsing from within. And once the descent starts, nothing can stop it. Their initial inclination is to run. The same people who previously claimed to be untouchable are now scrambling for safety. Private planes are fueled in secret. Hidden routes that were previously utilized for control have become desperate. Exits. Frantic phone calls are made in quiet tones. Messages are encoded with urgency. They'd always kept an open door for themselves, an escape route just in case. But what happens if all escape routes are blocked? Men who formerly controlled entire businesses are suddenly witnessing their money evaporate before their eyes. The accounts they concealed offshore were frozen. The magnificent houses they fortified captured reliable associates who had formerly been faithful but now refused to heed their calls. They reach out to individuals who had previously kept their secrets, only to be met with silence. They thought that power was everlasting and that the empire they constructed would remain uncontested. However, power is only as powerful as those who maintain it. Those who had previously bowed before them have now turned their backs. Doesn't this sound strangely familiar? Haven't we seen this fall before? The great are brought down, and the haughty are stripped of their illusions. Babylon's monarch, King Nebuchadnezzar, once stood on the tallest throne, declaring himself untouchable. Isn't this the huge Babylon that I created as the royal dwelling with my immense strength and for the glory of my majesty? Daniel 4:30, but in a second, his dominion was stripped away. His pride changed to shame when he was driven away and forced to live like a wild beast. He believed his authority was permanent. However, he saw that genuine dominion is reserved only for God. Even in contemporary times, we have seen great leaders who felt they were beyond the law, only to have their dominance shatter overnight. Consider those who formerly led companies, governments, or entire nations. Leaders whose names were formerly revered with veneration are now whispered in dishonor. They built their empires on sand, just to have them wash away. So the question is, what about you? Are you noticing this shift? Do you see the strong trembling and the powerful losing their grip? If history, both biblical and global, has taught us anything, it is that no kingdom established on lies can last. No castle based on injustice can stand. And when the autumn arrives, it is rapid. It is definitive and ultimate. And one by one, they are being abandoned. The same people who formerly stood by their side and followed out their orders without question are now walking away. Some people continue to fight for their rights, desperately grasping for power. They make pronouncements with hollow words, aiming to mold the narrative once more. They create distractions, causing turmoil in order to deflect attention. They spend money on a conflict that cannot be purchased, throwing riches into an unstoppable fire. They threaten, they bribe, they twist the plot in every direction, but nothing works. Why? Because fear is no longer an ally. Once, their very existence demanded obedience. A gaze, a word, and a hushed warning. Enough to make whole countries kneel. People bowed their heads, scared to protest, too terrified to talk. But the terror is gone, where obedience once reigned. Now, defiance remains unshaken. Previously, dishonesty has muffled the truth. Now, just the truth remains. This is more than simply an unpleasant transfer in power. This is not a small setback. This marks the end. No more secret passageways where choices are made behind closed doors. There will be no more covert meetings when futures contracts are acquired and traded. No more meticulously organized schemes coming together in their favor. The game is concluded, and while they have lost, some refuse to accept it. They hope they can claw their way back, searching the darkness for the force that once supported them. They hurl money at issues that affluence alone cannot fix. They mutter threats into the emptiness, but the weight of their words has evaporated. Their enforcers, who previously carried out their commands without hesitation, have vanished, captured, lost, or hiding for fear of being discovered. They are being forgotten by their former allies, severing links and pretending the association never existed. The calls they place go unanswered. Nobody is coming to their rescue. Others panic, desperate to transfer the blame. They rewrite their own stories in an attempt to create a new identity before the dust settles. They fill the airwaves with denials, presenting themselves as victims and constructing intricate theories to conceal their actions. They turn on their own people, using them as scapegoats in the hope that a sacrifice will buy them time. But the world is not listening. The reality is too apparent and overpowering to be manipulated. Every justification falls hollow. Every cover narrative crumbles under the weight of indisputable facts. This is not a transient crisis. This is judgment playing out in front of their eyes. Could you see it? Do you remember this point in history? The powerful have fallen often in this manner. The Egyptian king felt his control was absolute. He chased the children of Israel into the Red Sea, only to see his army devoured by the seas. Exodus 1428. King Herod attempted to silence the truth by murdering the innocent. He met a horrific end, and even his followers abandoned his name. Acts 1223. Even in contemporary times, we have witnessed powerful leaders who were previously untouchable and feared being brought down by their own hubris. Consider the business moguls, political leaders, and so-called untouchables who built their fortunes on lies, only to see everything shatter. So what does this imply for you? If God's justice is advancing and the truth is rising, where did falsehoods formerly reign? What part are you supposed to play? Are you holding firm in the truth? Have you been tempted to trust the illusion? Because once the collapse begins, it does not end. And when the judgment comes, it is final. No plan, last-minute move, or whispered pact in the dark will reverse what has already begun. The reckoning they never believed in, the judgment they arrogantly ignored, is now happening in front of them. The building they erected, crafted with such perfection and kept under strict supervision, is tumbling into ruin. This is more than simply another task to overcome. This is not a test of resilience, a chance to recover and strike back. This marks the end of an empire that thought it was invincible, the demise of a delusion that had deceived so many for so long. No more backroom deals in which futures were sold behind closed doors. No more covert partnerships in which allegiance was exchanged for power. They no longer have influence over the minds and hearts of the people they deceived. The illusion has crumbled, and all that left is the burning ruins of a kingdom that was never meant to last. Now all they can do is watch it burn to the ground. The equilibrium is changing. For too long, they reigned with iron fists, bending reality to their will. They carved out control by deception, deciding who would ascend and who would be set away. They stifled voices, shifted narratives, and tipped the scales to benefit themselves. They built a system so rigged and painstakingly tailored in their favor that they were confident it would never fail them. However, nothing lasts forever. The stronghold of secrecy, unbridled authority, and the ability to silence opponents without consequence has crumbled. The thing they revered above all else, the power they held as if it were divine right, has fallen from their hands like sand through their fingers. And what about those they wanted to erase? They never vanished. They never wavered. They were humiliated, insulted, classified as outsiders, and called dumb for standing up for the truth. Forced into the darkness and pushed to question their own reality. Despite all, they remained unbroken. Doesn't this remind you of the tale of Joseph? He was sold into slavery by his own siblings after being wrongly accused. Imprisoned, the world has forgotten me. Despite his hardship, God's favor never left him. When God resurrected him from the dead, even those who had rejected him were obliged to bow before him. Genesis 4,141-43. They were never alone. Even when the world tried to make them feel abandoned, when the walls closed in and the darkness looked complete, God was present. And now it's time for repair. They didn't fall. They waited. They adapted. And now they are rising. How often have we witnessed the same heavenly reversal? Throughout history, the downtrodden become liberators. The stillness transforms into the strongest shouts of truth. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 7 years, emerged not as a bitter man, but as the leader who would end apartheid. Harriet Tubman, a former slave, became the power that led hundreds to freedom. They too were mocked. They too were sacked. However, they never stopped pressing forward. So the question is, what about you? You've been put aside. You've been forced to doubt your value, made to feel little in a world that seems too powerful to challenge. Could you sense it? The shift. The tide is changing. The rising of the hitherto unseen. Because the truth cannot be buried forever. And when God moves, nothing in the world can stop what he has put in motion. What was taken is now being restored. Not only monetary money or influence, but something much more precious. Something that cannot be measured in gold or tallied with numbers. The freedom to live without fear. The freedom to develop without restrictions. The right to talk without the heavy bands of concealment that bind every speech. For so long, they kept the planet hostage. They determined what could be spoken, what could be built, what could possibly be imagined. They governed with dread, by exercising control, through an illusion so great that many thought it was impenetrable. But what happens when those shackles are turned against the same people who made them? The air vibrates with change. Unstoppable, irreversible. They methodically unraveled the fallacies. The illusion that they have maintained for generations is shattering under the crushing weight of indisputable reality. The same terror that previously drove their dominion, the terror that kept others mute, is now gnawing at their own heels. It turns against them, devouring the last delicate shards of the delusion they so desperately hold on to. Desperation persists in their final actions. They rush to reconstruct what has already crumbled to dust. They distort stories and manipulate the airwaves, striving for power that no longer exists. But the magic is shattered. The deceit was revealed. The castle they created was never as sturdy as they thought. It was created on borrowed time, which has since gone out. Do you see it? Are you feeling it? The changing of the tide. The powerful always believe that their dominion will continue forever. Pharaoh imagined he could enslave the Israelites eternally. He hardened his heart against God's warnings, believing his dominion was unstoppable. However, when the ultimate plague struck and judgment arrived, not even Egypt's strength could prevent it. Exodus 1229-31, the greatest monarch of his day, was forced to entreat with people he had formerly oppressed to flee. History has always repeated itself. The collapse of the powerful is unavoidable when they built their thrones on tyranny. Consider the vast empires that once looked impenetrable. Rome, despite its great empire, collapsed under its own corruption. The Soviet Union, long feared, disintegrated, virtually rendering its leaders impotent. No monarchy established on deception, terror, or greed has ever endured the test of time. So, why should this time be different? The clock has struck the last hour. The tide has turned. The long night has ended. As the final remnants of their authority die away, a new dawn emerges. Unstoppable, unquestioned, and unmistakable. And you're standing within it. Can you see what's happening in front of you? Because this is more than just a change of power. This is a celestial awakening. The entire world is watching. The sky are shifting. And people who were previously marginalized are moving into the spotlight. As we conclude today's sermon, I want you to consider one irrefutable reality. Even when it seems like life has taken everything from you, God's plan for your life remains unwavering. Yes, you may have experienced loss, sorrow, and times when it felt like everything was taken away from you. But God is in the midst of everything, working behind the scenes. He's never forgotten you, and He is utilizing all you've done to prepare you for the bigger things He has in store. Your narrative is not done, and no matter how lost you feel right now, God is still writing it. The same God who raised up the Israelites, saved David from Goliath, and restored Job's fortunes. He is with you now. Trust in Him. Lean into His presence. Remember that your path is not about what you've lost, but about what God is preparing you for in the future. If this message touched your heart and you feel compelled to donate, I invite you to give via the Super Thanks button. Your contribution enables us to continue spreading the word and reaching more people with the hope and truth of God's love. Whether you choose to give or not, I am deeply thankful to each and every one of you. Your being here matters a lot. Please enjoy this video. Share it with friends and family that need encouragement. Also, remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future communications. Your feedback is always welcome and appreciated, so please share your ideas or ask any questions you may have. May God pour His plentiful blessings into your life and restore everything that has been lost. You are His chosen one, and He will be with you every step of the way. Continue walking with trust that your breakthrough is approaching. Thank you for being a member of this community. Stay blessed.